I walked into that living room, and there was my 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, sitting on the floor, cradling her arm like it was broken. Her cousin Tommy, all 10 years old and smirking, stood over her like he'd just won some kind of prize. "He's a boy," my mother-in-law declared, arms crossed, looking at me like I was the problem. "She must have said something." My father-in-law nodded along. "Boys will be boys, Amanda. Sophie probably provoked him." They made her say sorry to the kid who hit her, made my daughter apologize for getting hurt. I smiled, picked her up, left without a word. And 2 days later, they got a call that changed everything. The monthly family dinner at the Mitchell house had always been David's tradition, not mine. Every second Sunday, we'd pile into the car, Sophie in her best dress, me carrying whatever casserole I'd stress-baked the night before, and drive to his parents' sprawling colonial in the suburbs. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. David's mom, Patricia, would fuss over the table settings. His dad, Robert, would pour wine and talk about his golf game. David's older brother, James, would show up with his wife, Lisa, and their golden child, Tommy. But if you looked closer, if you really watched, you'd see how Sophie always went quiet the moment we walked through that door. How she'd stick close to my leg, her usual chatterbox personality evaporating like morning mist. "Sophie, sweetie, go play with Tommy in the living room," Patricia would coo, already reaching for her precious grandson to ruffle his hair. Tommy's been so excited to see his little cousin. Tommy was everything they wanted in a grandchild. Loud, confident, athletic. He played Little League and brought home participation trophies that got displayed like Olympic medals. Sophie, on the other hand, preferred books and art projects. She was thoughtful, gentle, qualities that somehow translated to boring in the Mitchell family vocabulary. I'd learned to bite my tongue over the years. When Tommy got the bigger piece of cake, when he opened presents at Sophie's birthday party because he might feel left out, when Patricia bought him a new bike while Sophie got a generic coloring book from the dollar store. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air, thick as humidity before a storm. "Dinner's ready," Patricia called, and we all filed into the dining room. Tommy, as usual, claimed the seat next to Grandpa Robert, leaving Sophie to squeeze between me and the wall. The conversation flowed around sports, school, and James's promotion at work. Sophie picked at her mashed potatoes, barely speaking unless directly asked a question. When she did answer, her voice was so soft you had to strain to hear her. "Speak up, Sophie," Robert commanded. "Nobody can hear you when you mumble like that." Tommy, meanwhile, was regaling the table with stories about his latest baseball game, complete with dramatic reenactments that involved waving his fork around dangerously close to Sophie's face. "Tommy's coach says he's got real potential," James bragged, chest puffed with pride. "Could make varsity when he gets to high school." "That's wonderful," I said, then turned to Sophie. "Sophie's art teacher says she's incredibly talented. She painted a beautiful landscape last week." "That's nice," Patricia interrupted dismissively, already turning back to Tommy. "Now, Tommy, tell us about that home run again." I watched my daughter's face fall, and something cold settled in my chest. But I kept smiling. I always kept smiling. After dinner, Patricia shooed everyone into the living room while she and I cleared the table. It was an unspoken rule. The women cleaned while the men relaxed. Lisa had learned to disappear during cleanup time, always conveniently needing to take an important phone call. "Sophie's been awfully quiet tonight," Patricia said, not looking at me as she rinsed plates. "Is everything okay at home? Sometimes children act out when there are problems in the marriage." The passive aggression was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Sophie's fine. She's just naturally more reserved than Tommy." Patricia's tone suggested she thought otherwise. Maybe she needs to toughen up a bit. The world isn't kind to sensitive children. I wanted to say that maybe the world would be kinder if people like her stopped trying to crush that sensitivity out of kids. Instead, I dried another glass and kept my mouth shut. From the living room came the sound of children's voices, then a sharp cry that made every mother in the house freeze. We rushed in to find Sophie on the floor, holding her arm, tears streaming down her face. Tommy stood nearby, his face flushed with anger. "She took my game," he shouted. "I was playing with it and she just grabbed it." "Sophie, what happened?" I knelt beside my daughter, gently examining her arm. There was already a red mark forming where Tommy had grabbed her. I just wanted to play too," Sophie whispered. "He said I could have a turn after he finished this level, but then he said never mind, and I thought maybe—" "She's lying!" Tommy exploded. "She tried to steal it. I had to stop her." That's when Patricia stepped in, her voice sharp with authority. "Tommy, you need to be more careful with your strength. But Sophie, you can't just take things that don't belong to you." I looked up at her, disbelief washing over me. "He hurt her. He's a boy," Patricia said. Like that explained everything. Boys are naturally stronger. She must have said something to upset him. Robert nodded sagely. Girls need to learn they can't provoke boys and expect no consequences. James crossed his arms. "Tommy doesn't just lash out for no reason. Sophie must have done something." Even David, my own husband, stood there silent, unwilling to defend his daughter against his family's twisted logic. "Sophie," Patricia's voice dripped with false sweetness, "I think you owe Tommy an apology for trying to take his game." My daughter looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, waiting for me to protect her, waiting for someone, anyone, to stand up for her. "Go ahead, sweetie," Lisa added unhelpfully. "Say you're sorry so we can all move on." The room went quiet. Everyone stared at my 8-year-old daughter, expecting her to apologize for being hurt, expecting her to learn that her pain mattered less than a boy's anger. I felt something shift inside me like a gear clicking into place. I looked at each of their faces. David's family, who claimed to love Sophie but treated her like a second-class citizen in her own family. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that should have made them nervous. I scooped Sophie into my arms, feeling her small body trembling against mine. "We're leaving." "Amanda, don't be dramatic," Patricia said. "Children fight. It's normal." I didn't answer. I just carried my daughter out to the car, buckled her into her seat, and drove home in silence. But that silence? That was me planning. The drive home was quiet, except for Sophie's occasional sniffles. She sat in her booster seat, still cradling her arm, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "Mom?" Her voice was small, confused. "Why did I have to say sorry? Tommy hurt me." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, choosing my words carefully. How do you explain injustice to an 8-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that some people will always matter more than she does in certain rooms? Sometimes, sweetheart, people don't see things clearly. They think because Tommy is older and stronger, that makes his feelings more important than yours. But that's not right. But Grandma Patricia said... Grandma Patricia was wrong. The words came out sharper than I intended. I softened my voice. "Sophie, look at me." She turned those big brown eyes toward the rearview mirror. "You never have to apologize for being hurt. You never have to say sorry for standing up for yourself. And you never, ever have to make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable. Do you understand?" She nodded, but I could see the confusion still clouding her features. At 8 years old, she didn't understand why the adults she trusted could be so wrong about something that seemed so obvious to her. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I understood perfectly, because I'd been the Sophie in my own family once. The sensitive one. The one who was told to toughen up, to stop being so dramatic, to not rock the boat. I'd married David partly because he seemed different from the men in my family. Gentler. More understanding. But apparently, when push came to shove, he was just another man who would let his family steamroll the women in his life to keep the peace. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I sat in my home office, the one room in our house that was entirely mine. David found me there, laptop open, typing furiously. "Amanda, we need to talk about what happened tonight." I didn't look up from my screen. "Do we? You embarrassed me in front of my family. Sophie and Tommy were just playing and you turned it into this big dramatic scene." Now I looked up, really looked at him. This man I'd married, the father of my child, standing there more concerned about his embarrassment than his daughter's well-being. "Your son hurt our daughter, and your family made her apologize for it." "Tommy's not my son. Your nephew. Your family. Same difference." I turned back to my laptop. "They taught our daughter that her pain doesn't matter, that boys can hurt girls and the girls need to say sorry for inconveniencing them." David sank into the chair across from my desk. "You're overreacting. Kids fight. It's normal." "Is it normal for the victim to apologize to their attacker?" "Attacker? Jesus, Amanda, he's 10 years old." I saved my document and closed the laptop. David didn't know that I'd spent the last 2 hours researching child development, family dynamics, and legal protections for minors. He didn't know that I'd already sent 3 carefully crafted emails to people from my old life, the life before I became David Mitchell's wife and Sophie's mom. "I'm going to bed," I said, standing up. "We can discuss this tomorrow when you've had time to think about whose side you want to be on." "Sides? Amanda, they're my family." I paused at the doorway. So are we. But as I climbed the stairs, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. In David's mind, there was a hierarchy. His parents, his brother, his nephew, they were family by blood, by history, by tradition. Sophie and I, we were family by choice, by law, by convenience. And when those 2 types of family came into conflict, we just learned exactly where we ranked. That night, I lay awake planning. Not the emotional, revenge, fantasy kind of planning. The methodical, professional kind. The kind I'd learned in law school before I'd given up my career to be a full-time mom. See, there were things about me that David's family didn't know, had never bothered to ask about. They saw David's wife and Sophie's mom and thought that was the whole story. They didn't know that before I became Mrs. Mitchell, I was Amanda Rodriguez, law review editor and top 10% of my class. They didn't know that I'd specialized in family law, that I'd worked for the district attorney's office handling child welfare cases. They didn't know that I still maintained my bar certification, still kept in touch with colleagues, still understood exactly how the system worked when children were being harmed. And they definitely didn't know that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who stays quiet and smiles. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Sarah Chen, now a supervisor at Child Protective Services. Marcus Thompson, a private investigator who specialized in family cases. Elena Vasquez, a child psychologist who testified in dozens of custody hearings. People I hadn't talked to in years, but who would remember me, who would trust my judgment, who would understand that when Amanda Rodriguez called in a favor, it was serious. I started with a text to Sarah. "Hey, it's Amanda. I know it's been a while, but I could use some advice on a family situation. Coffee tomorrow?" Then Marcus. "Hi, Marcus. Hope you're well. I might need some discreet research help regarding child welfare. Can we talk?" And Elena. "Elena, it's Amanda Mitchell, Rodriguez. I need a professional consultation about documenting emotional abuse patterns in children. Available this week?" By morning, I had 3 coffee dates scheduled and a plan taking shape. David found me in the kitchen making breakfast, humming softly as I flipped pancakes. Sophie sat at the table, coloring in her book, the bruise on her arm hidden under a long-sleeved shirt. "You seem better this morning," David said cautiously. I smiled, the same smile I'd given his family the night before. "I've had time to think." "Good. So we can put this behind us, maybe call my mom, smooth things over?" "Oh, I'm definitely going to handle this situation," I said, sliding pancakes onto Sophie's plate. "Don't worry about that." David relaxed, probably thinking I meant I'd apologize. Make nice. Be the good daughter-in-law who didn't cause waves. He had no idea that I was about to create a tsunami. After he left for work and Sophie for school, I met Sarah at a coffee shop downtown. She looked exactly the same. Sharp suit, kind eyes, the bearing of someone who'd seen too much but still believed in doing the right thing. "Amanda Rodriguez," she said, hugging me tight. "I was so happy to get your text. How's married life treating you?" "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken of Sophie's arm the night before. "What would you say if you saw bruises like this on a child?" Sarah's expression shifted to professional concern. "I'd want to know how they happened and whether the child was safe. This is your daughter?" I told her the whole story. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes in the small notebook she always carried. "So let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "Your daughter was physically hurt by an older child, and instead of addressing the aggressor's behavior, the family blamed the victim and forced her to apologize?" "That's exactly what happened." "And this is a pattern? The boy being favored and protected while your daughter is marginalized?" "It's been going on for years, but last night was the first time it got physical." Sarah closed her notebook. "Amanda, what you're describing is emotional abuse, and if it escalates to regular physical incidents," she shook her head. "You know what happens to children who grow up learning that their pain doesn't matter?" I did know. I'd seen those cases when I worked for the DA's office. Children who grew up accepting abuse as normal, who became either perpetrators or victims in their adult relationships, who struggled with self-worth and boundaries their entire lives. "What are my options?" "Well, officially, I can't give you legal advice. But as a friend, document everything. Photos, dates, witnesses. If this pattern continues, you might need to consider limiting contact to protect your daughter's psychological well-being." "And unofficially," Sarah leaned forward. "Unofficially, I've seen this story before. The golden child who can do no wrong, enabled by adults who should know better. It doesn't usually get better on its own. Someone has to make it stop." From there, I drove across town to meet Marcus at his office. He specialized in background investigations for custody cases, the kind of deep research that revealed the skeletons people tried to keep buried. "I need you to look into David's brother, James Mitchell," I said, sliding a file folder across his desk with all the information I had. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Family troubles? His son has behavioral issues that the family enables. I want to know if there's a pattern. School records, any previous incidents, maybe some history on James himself." "You think there's more to the story?" "I think people don't just wake up one day deciding that violence is acceptable. This behavior comes from somewhere." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what I was asking for. "Give me 48 hours. My last stop was Elena's office. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been the expert witness in more child welfare cases than anyone else in the state. If she said a child was being harmed, judges listened. "I need an evaluation," I told her, explaining Sophie's situation. "Professional documentation of the psychological impact." Elena agreed to see Sophie that afternoon, conducting what appeared to be a friendly play session, but was actually a comprehensive psychological assessment. 3 hours later, I had a professional report detailing the signs of ongoing emotional stress in my daughter. The hypervigilance, the people-pleasing behaviors, the way she minimized her own needs to avoid conflict. "This child is walking on eggshells," Elena told me as I read through her findings. "She's learned that her emotional safety depends on making other people comfortable, even at the expense of her own well-being. If this pattern continues..." "What would you recommend?" "Immediate intervention, family therapy at minimum. And if the family refuses to change these dynamics, then limiting exposure to protect the child's psychological development." By evening, I had 3 professional opinions, a stack of documentation, and a plan that would unfold over the next 48 hours. When David came home, he found me cooking dinner, humming again. "You're in a good mood," he said, kissing my cheek. "I had a productive day." He didn't ask what I'd been productive about. If he had, I might have told him. I might have given him a chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem, but he didn't ask. So I just smiled and served dinner, counting down the hours until his family would learn that Amanda Mitchell wasn't nearly as passive as they'd assumed. Sometimes silence is the deadliest weapon, and they were about to find out exactly how dangerous a quiet woman could be. 48 hours after that dinner, I was in my office when the first call came in. It wasn't my phone ringing, it was David's, and he was downstairs having his morning coffee when it started buzzing insistently. "Amanda!" His voice carried up the stairs, panic already creeping in. "It's my mom. She sounds upset." I walked downstairs calmly, watching David's face grow pale as he listened to whatever Patricia was saying. His free hand gestured frantically, the way it did when he was trying to process too much information at once. "Slow down, Mom. What do you mean, an investigation? CPS? That's impossible." I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching the show. "No, there has to be some mistake," David continued. "Tommy's fine. James and Lisa are good parents. This doesn't make any sense." He hung up and stared at me with wide eyes. Child Protective Services called my parents this morning. Someone filed a report about Tommy displaying aggressive behavior toward other children. They want to interview the whole family. "That's terrible," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Poor Patricia must be so worried." David's phone rang again. This time it was James, and I could hear his panicked voice through the speaker, even from across the kitchen. "The school called," James was saying. "They want to meet with us about Tommy's behavioral record. Apparently there have been multiple incidents they never told us about. Fighting, pushing smaller kids, intimidating behavior. They're talking about suspension if it continues." "What incidents?" David asked. "Tommy's never been in trouble at school." "That's what I thought. But they have documentation going back 2 years. 2 years, David! How did we not know about this?" I set down my coffee cup. "Maybe you should ask Tommy about it." Both men looked at me like I'd just suggested something revolutionary. "Tommy would have told us if something was wrong," James said defensively. "Would he?" I asked. "Or would he have learned that certain behaviors get excused as boys will be boys?" David's phone rang a third time. This time it was Lisa, James's wife, and she was crying. "David, you need to talk to your brother. The neighbors are all talking about the CPS visit. Mrs. Henderson saw the caseworker at Mom and Dad's house yesterday. People are asking questions about Tommy, about our family. This is humiliating." When the call ended, David turned to me with accusation in his eyes. "This is too much of a coincidence. 3 calls in one morning, all about Tommy, right after what happened on Sunday." I met his gaze steadily. "Are you asking me something? Did you call CPS on my family?" "I called some old friends for advice about child welfare. That's not the same thing." "But you did something. This is your doing." I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. "David, let me ask you something. If Sophie came home from school with bruises and I told you it was fine because girls will be girls, what would you do?" "That's different. Is it? Or is it only different because this time it's your family being held accountable instead of being allowed to hurt someone else's child?" David stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Who are you? The woman I married wouldn't do something like this." "The woman you married was a lawyer who specialized in protecting children. Did you forget that? Or did you just assume I'd stop caring about justice because I became a mother?" Before he could answer, his phone rang again. This time it was Robert, and he was furious. "David, you need to get your wife under control. She's torn this family apart with her vindictive nonsense. We all know she's behind this CPS business, and it needs to stop, now." I could hear every word. Robert had never learned to modulate his voice when he was angry. "Tell him I'm not done yet," I said clearly, loud enough for Robert to hear through the phone. David looked at me with something approaching fear. "Amanda, what else did you do?" I smiled that same smile from Sunday night. "I documented everything. The favoritism, the enabling, the way your family teaches children that violence is acceptable as long as you're the stronger party. I have photos, witness statements, professional evaluations. Evaluations? Of what? Of Sophie. Of the psychological impact of growing up in an environment where her well-being is considered less important than Tommy's comfort. David's face went white. You had our daughter evaluated by a psychologist without telling me? I had our daughter evaluated by a professional who documented the signs of ongoing emotional stress, the hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the way she's learned to minimize her own needs to keep other people happy. Would you like to read the report? I pulled the folder from my purse, the one Elena had given me. David's hands shook slightly as he read through the findings. This makes it sound like we're abusing her. No, it makes it sound like she's being taught that her pain doesn't matter, that boys can hurt girls and the girls need to apologize for inconveniencing them, that her emotional safety is less important than maintaining family harmony. David set the report down like it might bite him. What do you want? I want your family to treat our daughter with the same care and respect they show Tommy. I want them to acknowledge that what happened on Sunday was wrong. I want genuine change, not just empty promises. And if they don't? I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd built a life with, wondering if he was finally ready to choose his daughter over his family's dysfunction. Then they don't get access to Sophie. Or to me, and you'll have to decide who matters more, the family that taught you to enable abuse or the family you created with me. David's phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a whole cascade of them as the Mitchell family group chat exploded with panic and blame. I could see him reading through them, watching his family implode in real time. Patricia demanding he control his wife. James threatening to never speak to us again if we didn't fix this mess. Robert talking about lawyers and revenge. Not one of them asking if Tommy was okay. Not one of them concerned about the pattern of behavior that had led to this moment. Not one of them willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong. They want me to choose, David said finally. Yes, they do, and so do I. He looked up at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Maybe it was the realization that his daughter's psychological well-being was hanging in the balance. Maybe it was understanding that his family's dysfunction ran deeper than he'd ever wanted to admit. Or maybe it was just the recognition that the quiet woman he'd married had enough evidence to destroy his family's reputation completely if she chose to use it. What happens now? He asked. Now we find out if your family loves Tommy enough to get him the help he needs, and if they love Sophie enough to treat her like she matters. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my private investigator. Just 3 words. You'll want this. I looked at David, still staring at his phone as message after message poured in from his panicking family. Or, I said quietly, we find out just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Because Marcus had found something that was going to change everything. And the Mitchells had no idea what was about to hit them. Marcus's text contained a single attachment, a police report from 3 years ago. James Mitchell arrested for domestic disturbance. Charges dropped after the victim, his then-girlfriend, suddenly refused to cooperate with prosecutors. I stared at the document on my phone screen, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The girlfriend's name was Rebecca Chen. She'd filed for a restraining order citing pattern of escalating verbal and physical intimidation. 2 weeks later, she'd married James in a quiet courthouse ceremony. Rebecca Chen became Lisa Mitchell, and 6 months later, Tommy was born. David, I said quietly, when did your brother and Lisa get married? He looked up from his phone, distracted. What, about 10 years ago. Why? Was it planned? Big wedding? No, it was really sudden. City Hall thing. Mom was disappointed she didn't get to plan anything. He frowned. Why are you asking about their wedding? I handed him my phone, watched his face change as he read through the police report, the restraining order petition, the timeline that painted a very different picture of his brother's character. "This can't be right," David whispered. "James wouldn't. He's never been violent. The report says otherwise. But Lisa never said anything. She seems happy." I thought about Lisa, always disappearing during family conflicts, never contradicting James, the way she flinched sometimes when he raised his voice, how she'd immediately sided with him against Sophie on Sunday, even though she'd seen Tommy hurt a little girl. "David, does Lisa ever disagree with your brother? Ever stand up to him?" He started to answer, then stopped. Really thought about it. No, she's always been really supportive of his decisions. Or really scared to contradict him. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Found more. Lisa's ex-roommate willing to talk. Says Lisa used to call her crying about James's temper before they got married. Roommate assumed Lisa would leave him after the arrest. Instead, Lisa had married her abuser, and now she was raising his son, teaching Tommy that dominance through intimidation was normal, that bigger, stronger people got to hurt smaller, weaker ones without consequences. The cycle was continuing, and everyone was pretending not to see it. "We need to talk to Lisa," I said. "Amanda, you can't just ambush her with some police report from 10 years ago." "I'm not going to ambush her. I'm going to offer her a way out." David stared at me like I'd lost my mind. A way out of what? The same pattern Sophie was being trained to accept. The same cycle Lisa's been trapped in for a decade. Before David could respond, his phone rang again. This time, it was Lisa herself, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "David, please," she gasped between tears. He's lost it. He's blaming me for everything. Says I must have told someone about his past, that I'm the reason CPS got involved. He's been screaming for hours." I took the phone from David's hand. "Lisa, this is Amanda. Are you safe right now?" What? Amanda? Are you physically safe? Is Tommy with you?" "Tommy's at school. James went to work, but he said things were going to change around here, that he wasn't going to let his family be destroyed by lies." "Lisa, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do you have somewhere you can go? Family, friends, anywhere that isn't your house?" "Why would I need to?" "Amanda, what's going on?" "Pack a bag for you and Tommy. Go somewhere public, somewhere safe. We need to talk, and it can't be at your house." There was a long pause. Then, in a very small voice, "You found it, didn't you? The police report." "Yes." I was wondering when that would come back to haunt us. 2 hours later, I met Lisa at a coffee shop near Tommy's school. She looked exhausted, like she'd been holding her breath for 10 years and had finally let it out. "How long have you known?" she asked. I suspected something was wrong. Marcus confirmed it this morning. Lisa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like it was the only warm thing in the world. He's not the same person he was back then. He got help. Anger management, therapy, he's changed. Has he? He doesn't hit me anymore. The way she said it, like that was the highest bar for a healthy relationship, broke my heart. "Lisa, what about Tommy?" Her face crumpled. "Tommy's not violent, he's just assertive. James says boys need to learn to stand up for themselves by hurting smaller children. He doesn't mean to hurt them. He just doesn't know his own strength." I pulled out Elena's psychological evaluation of Sophie, the one that documented the signs of ongoing emotional stress. "This is what assertive boys do to sensitive girls, Lisa. This is what your son's behavior is teaching my daughter about her place in the world." Lisa read through the report with growing horror. "Sophie is really... This is because of Tommy. This is because of a family system that teaches children that might makes right, that bigger people get to hurt smaller people, that girls exist to absorb boys' anger and apologize for inconveniencing them. But James says..." James learned this behavior from somewhere, Lisa, and now he's teaching it to Tommy, just like Tommy was teaching it to Sophie. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the evaluation report. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes full of pain and recognition. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to break the cycle. Get Tommy into real therapy, not just anger management. Set boundaries with James. Stop enabling behavior that hurts other children." "And if James won't agree to that?" I leaned forward. "Then you need to decide what kind of man you want your son to become. Because right now, he's learning that love looks like control, that relationships are about power, and that violence is acceptable as long as you're stronger than your victim." Lisa's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went pale as she read it. "It's James. He wants to know where I am. He's not happy that I left the house. Don't tell him you're with me. Amanda, I don't think you understand. James isn't just going to accept this quietly. When he feels cornered, when he thinks his reputation is threatened." She shuddered. The anger management helped, but it didn't cure him. It just taught him to be more careful about when and how he explodes. My phone rang. It was David. "Amanda, where are you? James is at our house. He's demanding to talk to you. He knows you're behind the CPS investigation, and he's furious." I could hear shouting in the background, James's voice raised in anger. "Call the police," I said calmly. "What? I can't call the police on my brother." "David, if a stranger was in your house screaming threats about your wife, what would you do?" "That's different." "It's not different. Call the police. Now." I hung up and turned to Lisa. "This is what I meant about cycles. James is escalating because he's losing control. How long until he takes that frustration out on Tommy? How long until Tommy thinks this is how men handle problems?" Lisa was crying now, understanding finally hitting her with full force. "What have I done? What have I let happen?" "You survived," I said gently. "And now you have a chance to make sure Tommy doesn't grow up thinking this is normal." My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Police are here. James is gone. Found him trying to get into your office upstairs. He was looking for something." I knew what he'd been looking for. Evidence, documentation, anything he could use to discredit me or cover up his family's dysfunction. What he didn't know was that I'd already given copies of everything to Sarah at CPS, to Marcus for safekeeping, and to Elena for her files. The evidence was beyond his reach now. "Lisa," I said, "I can help you and Tommy start over. But you have to want it, really want it, because the Mitchell family is going to pressure you to stay quiet, to protect James, to pretend none of this ever happened." She wiped her eyes, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something like strength in her expression. "What do I need to do?" "First, you and Tommy are going to stay somewhere safe tonight. Then tomorrow, we're going to have a family meeting. Everyone together with a mediator, a real conversation about change. And if they refuse, then you and Tommy get to decide what kind of family you want to be part of. One that protects abusers or one that protects children." Lisa picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "My sister lives 2 hours away. She's been asking me to visit for years. Call her." While Lisa arranged a safe place to stay, I thought about the conversation that was coming. Patricia and Robert faced with the truth about their golden child. James confronted with the consequences of his behavior. David forced to choose between enabling his family's dysfunction or protecting his daughter. And Sophie, finally learning that sometimes the people who love you will fight for you, even when it's hard. My phone rang again. This time it was Sarah from CPS. "Amanda, I need to let you know that we've opened a formal investigation into the Mitchell family. Based on what you've provided and what we've discovered independently, we're recommending family therapy and supervised visitation for Tommy with other children." "What about James?" "That's more complicated. The historical domestic violence incident, combined with the current pattern of enabling his son's aggressive behavior, raises some red flags. We'll be monitoring the situation closely. After I hung up, Lisa looked at me with something approaching awe. You really did it. You actually made them listen. No, I said. I just made sure the truth couldn't be ignored anymore. The family meeting happened 2 days later in Elena's office. Neutral ground with a professional mediator who'd seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable. Patricia and Robert arrived first, faces tight with barely controlled anger. They'd spent the last 48 hours trying to control the narrative, calling everyone they knew to complain about vindictive daughters-in-law and overzealous social workers. James came next, with Lisa and Tommy. The boy looked confused and scared, probably the first time in his life he'd faced real consequences for his behavior. David and I arrived last with Sophie. I debated bringing her, but Elena had insisted. She needs to see the adults in her life taking her well-being seriously, she'd said. Children who witness their parents fighting for them develop stronger self-advocacy skills. Elena started the meeting by laying out the ground rules. No interrupting, no name-calling, and everyone would have a chance to speak. Let's begin with what happened last Sunday, she said. Tommy, can you tell us what you remember? Tommy glanced at his father, then his grandparents, looking for cues about what he was supposed to say. I was playing my game, and Sophie tried to take it, he said finally. And then what happened? I grabbed it back. You grabbed the game or you grabbed Sophie? Tommy's face flushed. I grabbed her arm, but I didn't mean to hurt her. How did you feel when you grabbed her? Mad. She wasn't supposed to take my stuff. Elena nodded. And Sophie, how did you feel when Tommy grabbed you? Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Scared. And it hurt. Did you take Tommy's game without asking? No, he said I could have a turn after he finished the level, but then he said never mind, and I thought maybe if I asked again. Patricia started to interrupt, but Elena held up a hand. Tommy, did you tell Sophie she could have a turn? Maybe. I don't remember. The Sophie wasn't trying to steal from you. She was asking for the turn you'd promised her. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. I guess. And when you got angry about that, what did you do? I grabbed her. Did you think about using your words instead? She wasn't listening. But did you try words first? Tommy was quiet for a long moment. No. Elena turned to the adults. Let's talk about what happened after Tommy hurt Sophie. Who can tell me how the family responded? The room erupted. Patricia insisted Tommy was just defending his property. Robert claimed Sophie had provoked him. James argued that boys needed to learn to stand up for themselves. Elena let them talk for a few minutes, then called for quiet. What I'm hearing, she said, is that when Tommy used physical force against a smaller child, the family's response was to justify his behavior and blame the victim. Is that accurate? That's not how it happened, Patricia protested. Then how did it happen? Patricia launched into her version of events, painting Tommy as the innocent victim of Sophie's aggression. But as she talked, Elena took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that poked holes in the narrative. So you're saying that an 8-year-old girl posed such a physical threat to a 10-year-old boy that he had no choice but to use force? Well, no, but... And you believe that the appropriate response to a child being hurt was to make that child apologize to her attacker. She wasn't attacked. She was, Mrs. Mitchell, your grandson caused physical injury to another child. What word would you use to describe that action? Patricia fell silent, realizing that every word out of her mouth was making things worse. Elena turned to James. Mr. Mitchell, as Tommy's father, how do you plan to address this behavior? Tommy's not a bad kid. He just needs to learn to control his temper. What strategies are you currently using to teach him that? James looked blank. We talked to him. Tell him not to hit. Has that been effective? The silence stretched uncomfortably. According to his school records, Tommy has been involved in physical altercations with other children multiple times over the past 2 years, so it seems like talking isn't working. Elena pulled out a thick file. Tommy, I want you to listen carefully. Your behavior is hurting other children. And when adults make excuses for that behavior, instead of helping you learn better ways to handle your feelings, they're not helping you. They're setting you up to become someone who hurts people. Tommy started crying. Real tears, not the manipulative kind he usually used to get out of trouble. I don't want to hurt people, he whispered. Then you need to learn new ways to handle anger and frustration, ways that don't involve using your size and strength to intimidate others. Elena looked around the room. This family has a choice. You can continue enabling Tommy's aggressive behavior and watch him develop into someone who solves problems with violence. Or you can get him the help he needs and teach him that real strength comes from protecting people, not hurting them. What kind of help? Lisa asked quietly. Intensive therapy for Tommy, focusing on emotional regulation and empathy development. Family therapy for all of you to address the communication patterns that led to this situation, and supervised interactions with other children until Tommy demonstrates consistent self-control. Patricia bristled. We're not subjecting our family to some kind of psychological experiment because Amanda has hurt feelings. Elena's voice was steel. Mrs. Mitchell, this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about preventing your grandson from developing into an adult who believes that violence is an acceptable way to solve problems. Because that's the path he's currently on. She pulled out another file, this one containing research studies about childhood aggression patterns. Children who exhibit persistent aggressive behavior that's enabled by family members are statistically more likely to engage in domestic violence as adults. They're more likely to have problems with authority, more likely to struggle in relationships, more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. The room went dead silent. You have a choice, Elena continued. Intervene now when Tommy is still young enough to learn better patterns, or watch him repeat the mistakes of previous generations. I saw James flinch at that last part. Elena had done her homework. She knew about his arrest record, his own struggles with anger management. This isn't about punishment, Elena said gently. It's about giving Tommy the tools he needs to become a healthy, well-adjusted adult. But it requires admitting that the current approach isn't working. David spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. What happens if we don't agree to the therapy? Elena looked at him sadly. Then CPS will make the decision for you, and the court-mandated interventions are much more intrusive than what I'm recommending. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances. James stared at his hands. Lisa held Tommy while he cried. Finally, Robert spoke. How long would this therapy take? That depends on Tommy's progress and the family's willingness to change entrenched patterns. Minimum 6 months, possibly longer. And what about family gatherings? Holidays? Supervised visits only until Tommy demonstrates consistent emotional regulation and zero tolerance for any physical aggression. Patricia looked like she was going to argue, but Robert put a hand on her arm. We'll do it, he said quietly. We'll do whatever Tommy needs. For the first time in years, I felt hope. But the real test would come later, when the cameras weren't rolling and the mediator wasn't watching. When the family had to choose, day after day, to do the hard work of changing instead of falling back into old patterns. As we left Elena's office, Sophie slipped her hand into mine. Mom, she whispered. Does this mean Tommy won't hurt me anymore? I squeezed her hand. It means the adults in your life are going to make sure you're safe, and that Tommy gets help learning better ways to handle his feelings. And I don't have to apologize when someone hurts me? Never again, baby. Never again. 6 months later, Tommy had learned to use his words instead of his fists. James was in anger management therapy, working on breaking cycles he'd inherited from his own childhood. Lisa had found her voice and was learning to set boundaries. And Sophie? Sophie was learning that her feelings mattered, that her safety was a priority, and that the people who loved her would fight for her, even when it was hard. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to accept normal when normal is toxic. Sometimes love looks like disruption, like making people uncomfortable, like insisting that children deserve better than the dysfunction of previous generations. The Mitchell family learned that the hard way, but they learned, and in the end, that's what mattered most.